Namaskar and welcome to Tutul Dialogues. On Tutul Dialogues, we invite people who do exceptional work and touch many lives in the process. I'm so happy to have with us Anil Nair, who is the CEO of St. Jude's Childcare, one of our clients. A little bit about Anil. Anil started his typical career trajectory with doing an engineering and then doing an MBA from MBA and then started working with stints in software and consumer sales, but then took a very significant turn and found himself working with long distance truck drivers to keep them safe from AIDS. He then went on to work with an organization that works with MPs and MLAs to keep them informed on the nuances of the bills they vote into laws and with the city governments to improve the quality of life in our cities. Anil has travelled in and worked with over 23 out of the 29 states in India. At St. Jude's, where he came on board as the CEO in 2019, he has been heading and leading the transition from a volunteer-driven organization to a professionally managed one. We've worked with St. Jude's for the last few years and we've seen the way Anil and his team has created great impact and built a great institution. We're so looking forward to listening to your experiences and insights on the Tutul Dialogues. So let me start with the first question. Anil, you went to VJTI, very prestigious engineering college, and IIM Calcutta. And then you started your career in financial services and then in a marketing department of of an organization known for its brands. From there, your career took a very significant turn into the social sector. Can you tell us a little bit about how you thought about this and what happened for you to come here?
Sure. Thank you, Sujata, firstly for having me here, and thanks to Tutul Dialogues for inviting me to the session. So to answer your question, I think for both the institutions that you mentioned, as you're aware, are government institutions. And when I think back around 20-25 years back, and I remember that feeling privileged to be able to enjoy the benefit of subsidized education, both in engineering and medicine and so on. At that point, and when we read about why these institutions were set up, I mean, some of them go back really far back, both VJT and IIMs, were to solve the problems of the country. And I found that when I look back at the people who graduated with me, almost around 70-80% of the class were abroad doing things which are not they were trained for. And the same was happening with IIMs as well, in terms of, just to give you a background, the IIMs were set up, both Ahmedabad and Calcutta were set up for specific purposes. I think Ahmedabad tied up with Harvard to look at agriculture and related areas and so on, and Ahmedabad and Calcutta as well. Calcutta at that time, you may know that, used to be the hub, the economic hub before Bombay rose in prominence. So it was set up for a specific purpose, and when I looked around my batch, my seniors and so on, I found that none of them were really serving the country in any way. And it struck me that if people like us who have been privileged to enjoy subsidized education did not do something in the form of giving back, who would do it? And in terms of transition itself that you mentioned, even though that was not my plan to move immediately to non-profit after 2 or 3 years in for-profit organizations, I was hoping to do it eventually in my career a couple of decades later. But there were some developments in my life, and essentially a headhunter called me and offered me an interesting position where I was able to apply my skills, what I had learned both at my jobs as well as in the institutions I went to, and without any significant cutback in my compensation. So I think in many ways I thought it's the best of both worlds, and that's how my journey in non-profit space began.
What was the first, what are the differences you found when you moved out of your, commercial organization into social sector? What were the early days like? What are one or two things that really struck you as being different and challenging and good as well?
So one of the flip side of being in a privileged institution is that you tend to operate in a bubble, especially in a country like India. So we, having been in Bombay, having been able to go to the better schools and so on, we were living in a particular bubble, which in many ways gave us an edge. So the kind of colleagues you work with, the kind of teams you have, and in terms of sense of reality you get is essentially when you work with government. You realize in terms of people who are essentially on paper graduates or MBAs or so on, but they just don't speak the same language or operate in the similar way that they're used to in private sector organizations. So in many ways, I think my first experience with non-profit also was similar, in the sense that non-profit sector till recently, maybe a decade back, were heavily influenced by government. In fact, government used to be the major donors to non-profit sector. And for the last mile delivery, the government often used the network of non-profits. So they were heavily influenced by, in terms of HR practices, the kind of people, the procedure and so on, not by the private sector, which is what we see now. So the big change, to answer your question, was to operate in that environment where you're used to a team which gets things done. There is no miscommunication in terms of when you ask something to be done and so on. So that was a big change and learning for me.
Anil, how has your work with a variety of people like truck drivers and parliamentarians and children, and the work that you do, how has that shaped you as a professional and as a person? It's a very wide range of people that you work with.
So we often, in terms of post 2008 financial crisis, this whole terminology of 1%, 99% became in the norm, especially from the US context. But in India, actually, it's even worse. The starkness, the fact that there's only probably maybe 0.5% of people who are privileged and enjoy, in terms of the kind of affluence or access, one might expect. So to respond to your question, like I already mentioned, we didn't realize that we were living in a privileged space, not just in terms of caste, education, access and so on. So working with the people that we work with, starting with long distance truck drivers who really have tough lives, staying away from homes, very difficult lives they lead, and to the set of families that we work with now, which are essentially families from villages and small towns, who are forced to travel to big cities like Delhi or Bombay, because that's where medical treatment is available. I mean, we just do not have enough doctors or hospitals who can cater to children with cancer. So that keeps me, in a sense, keeps me rooted, reminds me where I come from, what country you're a citizen of, because it's easy to get lost spending your time in BKC or malls and so on and forget how the rest of the country is living like. So I think all the experiences I worked with, and I must mention that even parliamentarians, we get a unfortunately very biased picture of where they come from through media and so on, but it's not true. I mean, most of the MLAs, MPs we met, they're really rooted, and unlike the US, in parliamentarians and legislation in India really represent the masses. Unlike in US, as you know, there's a elitist capture in the veins of both the parties. In India, it's not true. So every time you spend some time with an MP or an MLA, you really get a window into what's happening in the country, in their constituency and so on. So that's in terms of the treasure, the experience, which I would say normally if I had followed a normal career path, working with my friends and colleagues in MBA and so on, I would never have had that experience.
Anil, you work with a very special organization, and it's called St. Jude's Childcare. And even before we worked with you, we read about the good work done, the way it's scaled up, the kind of awards it's received for innovation, the kind of rating it's got from CRISIL, and the fact that it is counted as one of the very well-run, very solid, I would say in some ways a role model organization. Tell us a little bit about your organization and the work you do, and then we'll talk about how you've built it in the last 3 years.
In many ways, St. Jude is a new generation NGO, in the matter of speaking. And I say that because increasingly now we are seeing the more empowered middle class thinking about problems beyond their own. And in India especially, you'll see a lot of non-profits now being set up by professionals who have spent years in industry, acquired knowledge and wanting to give back. So the story of St. Jude is somewhat similar. It was set up by Mr. Nihal Kaviratne and Mrs. Shama Kaviratne way back in 2006. He set it up after retirement from Unilever. He retired as the chairman of Unilever Indonesia. And so, I mean, anybody who has been closely associated with St. Jude's will clearly see the professional way in terms of the organization built from ground up. Starting from identifying a problem, which is in 2006, we identified through feedback from Tata Memorial that the housing for poor children, families of poor children who come to Bombay is a big need. And because of the lack of hygienic housing, we were losing children because of infections, given their immunocompromised state. And very often the parents would give up, given the long drawn treatment period of cancer. So the identification of the problem was a key insight, and I would credit it to the years of corporate training that Mr. Kaviratne had. So that's one. The other key in terms of steps that he took is to identify the right people at the right time. So what he did was he put together a team of young friends and family and assigned them specific responsibility, very similar to what you might see in a mature organization. So each of these volunteers were asked to give their time and take responsibility for a specific function. So there will be somebody who leads HR, somebody handling finance, somebody handling fundraising and so on. And the deliverables for them were very clear. And he, even though they were volunteers, I think the understanding between him and them was clear that there's a deliverable and they're accountable for that. I think that set the foundation for the organization, the way it's been built. And it served us very well in terms of we have teams of volunteers across the cities that we operate in. We operate in 11 cities across India now, and we have really committed volunteers who have been with us from the day one and continue to be engaged now. Where I have been able to contribute is to make sure that as we scale up and the complexity of operations increases, especially in light of CSR rules and government regulations, which have been far more complex now in the last few years compared to earlier. I mean, essentially earlier non-profits had a free hand, as you just raised money and did what you want. But now, given the quantum of money flowing through CSR, quantum of money flowing through foreign sources, it's heavily regulated. And it was time for us, given the way we are growing and the kind of monies we handle, to make sure that we have our house in order. So that's when we started the transition around 2019 to build on the foundation that had been offered by the founders and the volunteers, to prepare the organization for the next generation, in a manner of speaking. And we got, thankfully, got good support from the founders and board to identify and recruit professionals to handle this role and to transition these roles from what are handled by volunteers to these professionals, to make sure in terms of we are ready for the next 30-40 years.
So we'd love to understand from you some of the things, some of the steps you took on institution building, because building an institution that lasts, taking it to the next level is there. And you also had a bit of change because you had composition of new people coming in. So what were some of the building blocks of building the institution, and what are some of the lessons and insights as you look back in the last 4 years that you've learned that could be useful for people watching this?
I inherited a very strong organization with strong foundations, but it was obvious to me that in terms of scaling as well as in terms of long-term sustainability, this model had some weaknesses. In the sense, and it was borne out very well in terms of during the COVID pandemic, where mobility was severely restricted, especially of elderly people, given the risk. They were at higher risk during the pandemic. Yeah. And it meant that a lot of the volunteers who were actually actively involved on a day-to-day basis had to step back and given their movement was restricted. And our staff really had to step up and make sure that whatever they used to rely on volunteers earlier, they had to do it themselves. So that's one. The other issue is that in terms of identifying the right kind of volunteers whom we can trust and to represent the organization is not easy. And when we initially built up the network of volunteers, it was through personal networks and so on, because only those people will be able to trust to handle the brand of the organization or to serve the families in the way that we would like to. And as we grew and grew into newer cities, the network ran thin. So we could no longer find people within 1 or 2 degrees of separation whom we could trust and enter the St. Jude's brand. So it is necessary to look at a newer model. So especially in the last few years, when we went into cities like Varanasi, Visakhapatnam, Muzaffarpur in Bihar, Guwahati, we were not able to find the same kind of volunteers that we were lucky to find in Delhi or in Calcutta or in Chennai and so on. So which meant that we had to really look at building capacity of the staff to be able to manage without the kind of support that colleagues in Bombay or Delhi would have. So the first thing we did really is to get the board and the founders on board with this, the need to do this, and to convince the volunteers they need to probably step back, move into a mentoring role, allow the staff to grow and nurture their growth. Thanks, I mean, we did extensive work with Tutul as well, and I must also say that Bain Consulting did a pro bono work for us, and they were able to, in terms of convince both the board and some of the older volunteers the need for getting into this transition. Having said that, coming to the staff themselves, I mean, they were rooted in a particular way of working, And in many ways I felt that they had the potential, but they'd grown comfortable in a place in a way of working, and it is necessary to put them out to swim to make sure they discover their potential. So for some of the locations that I mentioned earlier, we actually sent some of the staff who are comfortable in the bigger cities and told them to set up those centers with all the support behind them. Not that they would make sure that they will be able to swim and not drown, but they were the ones who then rose and showed potential, which served us, which also helped us get a greater buy-in to this transition. Once we were able to showcase that this model would work and there are people with potential within the organization, the rest of the board or the volunteers who needed further convincing came on board. So the first thing, and just to in terms of close here, was that we had to get the board and the founders along, which is not easy in many non-profits. I must say I'm fortunate that they were able to understand what I'm proposing. And the second thing is to make sure the staff have conviction in themselves that they'll be able to do things which is probably new for them. But we need to take that risk and place our trust in them.
What did you win the innovation award for?
The model that we have, I mean, again, we must juxtapose it in terms of the country we are in terms of, there is a tendency in India to say this is good enough. If they need house, chalo you get a dharamshala, a bed is good enough. I think what our founder did, all credit to him, that he set the standard very high. He said it's not enough to just give a bed or a bathroom to them, which is the norm. What we did is we gave, and given that we're working with families, he said it's necessary to have some private space, given that they're going to stay there for a year or 2 years probably. So I think the major innovation was to give some dignity to the way the families stay in a crowded city like Bombay while the child is undergoing treatment. So we made sure that each family had a private space to stay with individual beds and cupboards and so on. And they also had a community space. So it's not like we packed every available square feet with rooms and beds. We made sure that there is time for the space for the children to engage in other activities, forget that they are undergoing treatment, play, study, for the parents to do some activities so that it takes their mind off the crisis that they are going through. I think that was the key innovation. And it is borne out by the feedback from the hospitals that the children who stay with us generally show better survival rate, better response to the treatment when they're staying with us.
Yeah, I've been to your center. It's cheerful, it's bright, it doesn't feel, I mean, you will have children with cannulas running around, but it's so clean and it's like anyone's house. It's as clean. I saw the kitchen. It's really wonderful. If you're in Mumbai or any of the cities, please go and see their centers. Yes. I'll come to the other question on leadership, because institution building is an area of interest for us as well as leadership. So we see many role models of leadership, and you are, if I may say, Anil, unusual leader. I see your demeanor as being calm, and you are probably the last to speak where I see you with your leadership team. Your very unassuming style of leadership. So tell us a little bit about your style of leadership. Why are you the way you are, and how is it working?
So I must say firstly that it was not by design, and in terms of whatever style that you mentioned, I recognize myself in that, but it's something I'm comfortable with. And in fact, that is the first takeaway as well. I remember reading or somebody telling me that just be genuine to the way you are. So I knew that I'm not an aggressive leader, I'm not a micromanaging kind of person, so it's better not to adopt that style. And so I think it started from there. So it's not a conscious choice to be the kind of leader I am. Having said that, in principle I believe that you must trust people and their potential. And even after attempts to help them reach their potential, then if it doesn't work, then it's better to part ways rather than being two unhappy people trying to work together. So that's the principle I followed. So in terms of in all the organizations where I had teams reporting to me, I gave them enough time to in terms of perform to the level that's required in the role and what is expected of by me. But if not, then I think we tend to part ways, because I found that it like we used to hear about bad apples. It's easy for one colleague to lower the bar of the whole team. So it's important. I mean, that's the kind of principle that I held. And what I have found is that till now, at least, people haven't breached your trust. So the flip side of not micromanaging is having to trust people to do their job, and very often you may know the end result only on D-Day. But so far it's worked well for me. But I must also say that feedback from my own reportees has been that they find me too less aggressive. They would like me to be more confrontational, and this may be with regard to their colleagues. They may not be speaking about themselves, but they have told me that it's better to in terms of they would like me to be a little more confrontational, and that's one feedback. The other feedback which I am very conscious of, having learned from other bosses, is that it is important to take people along. And very often the analogy of an engine and coaches come to me. There is absolutely no point of the engine running very fast, because the purpose of the engine is to take the passengers along. So I have to often hold back. Now it's easier for me now, but in the initial days, in terms, there's no point giving ideas and expecting people to implement if you know that they do not have the capacity or that they're not fully bought in. So those are some steps that has worked well for me. Like I especially said, in a transition kind of organization here, it was necessary for me to get buy-in from the older staff, who are essentially the backbone of the organization here. I must also add one more thing that Mr. Kavirajne said to me when I joined. He said that, given the organization has been functioning well for close to 13-14 years, he said, take your time to build trust with the team, so on. Then focus on building a network, and only then start undertaking changes. Don't jump in and start making changes, even if you feel that something is not going right. So I think that has really helped me as well. So Sujata, something I'm meaning to ask you is, especially in the context of the significant women workforce in St. Jude's, is that I've been struggling to put a finger on what are the motivations for women employees, or how are they different from male employees, based on your own example as well and other colleagues that you work with. Is there any significant difference you see, which would, in terms of which one should be conscious of in terms of motivations?
I think there are common things that women want the way men want. I think they want respect, they want opportunity to learn and grow in their workplace, and I think that's common between what men and women want. However, I think maybe one nuance that helps women make a choice and be happy where they stay is that a lot of, and I'm not talking about mothers and who have children to take care of, but in general there is I think women shoulder a larger load of taking care of aged parents or in-laws or children, and therefore they want workplaces that have policies that are sensitive and empathetic with flexibility. That is an equal consideration as is money and growth. And therefore, when women are making decisions to whether to stay or not, unless they have a toxic boss, in which case you can't stay, I think they look at the whole package. So what an organization offers holistically creates a lot of impact with women. And in places where it's a safe environment, that's still an issue in some places, where there is respect and where there is the right amount of empathy and flexibility, I think women find those places good to stay, and I think that women really bring in a lot of emotion and color. They're very happy to be part of the community at work, and they contribute to it. And I know a lot of women who really look forward to going to work because they are able to do that, which they may or may not be able to do as much in their personal lives. So I think creating that, when you change culture, it impacts women really a lot.
Another related question is, as you're aware, there's a trend now for in terms of a lot of professionals to take up gig assignments. One is obviously because it gives them greater flexibility, and it obviously in terms of compensation wise may be better in terms of utilization of the time. But I was looking at it from the point of view of organizations. You're familiar with the how difficult it is to build culture, even with full-time employees. So I was wondering, with this trend, which is quite rampant and it's moving up the value chain as well, how would it affect the organizational culture, and how does the job of HR change if a greater proportion of your employees are gig employees as compared to full-time employees?
I think it becomes harder because you've got lesser number of touch points and you are not having people be in the workspace for long periods of time. So I think HR is challenged, and I think it's not only HR's issue. I think it's HR can shape policies and work on culture, but collectively leadership needs to create more engaging moments for people to feel connected. One of the career anchors we talk about, there are many of them. One of them is getting secure, getting balanced, getting free, getting high. Getting high is getting excitement, and getting free is a career anchor that more and more people want, because they have other things they want to do in life, and that life doesn't revolve only around work. And therefore, accepting that people will have different aspects to their lives, and yet finding them, helping them find meaning and connection is a challenge. And I think that HR and leadership will have to think of very unique ways to build engagement, empowerment, and as well as methods in a hybrid work environment for people to engage and find meaning. I think the days of long meetings, the days of the usual humdrum things will go, and we need to keep it short, we need to keep it intense, and we need to keep it interesting. I see a few organizations doing good work in this area, but yes, it's a challenge we are going to face going forward. So Anil, it's been very interesting to listen to your experience of moving from being a student to exploring and working with different sets of people to get out of the bubble, as it were, and see real India, work with real India. I think there are 3-4 takeaways from the conversation with Anil Nair. One is that we all live in a bubble and we don't really understand how much of subsidizing the government does, and it's time that we gave it back by contributing to nation building. The second is that you only understand the country you are part of and its beauty and its challenges when you work with the people. The third is that when you're building an institution, you got to have patience and be authentic, be who you are, build trust, build network, and then look at change. And most new leaders jump into change as soon as they get into a new place because you can see things. But the patience and maturity to build that network and trust is what allows you to actually drive the change. And I think the last thing that I really loved to hear was that you're very comfortable in your style. You have the quite unassuming style and you make it work, though your team wants you perhaps at times to push a little bit. But I think that this quite unassuming style might get some of your team members to step up and do it, and I think that's a great way of building leaders. Anil, I would like to thank you so much for coming all the way to our office for Tutul Dialogues, and we hope to continue to our association with you, and we hope to continue working with you in the noble cause that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.